I'm glad I could get up. Oops. I'm glad I could get up here.
All right, off we go. Good afternoon, everybody. It's super great to be here. Thank you again to the Dubai Future Forum and Dubai Future Foundation for this fantastic opportunity. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about the intersection of planetary health and human health on our panel, Earth's Checkup. And I have an incredible panel next to me of experts. So my role is going to be minimal. We're going to start with an introduction. So I am Sonalie Figueiras. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Green Queen Media. I'm based in Hong Kong. To my left, we have Dr. Jemilah Mahmood, the founder of the Institute of Planetary Health at Sunway University, Malaysia. Dr. Jemilah?
Yes, thank you very much, Sonali. It's wonderful to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. I am Jemilah. I would call a retired and recovering humanitarian worker, but I established the Sunway Center for Planetary Health in Malaysia that looks at the intersection between the health of the planet and health of human civilization. I'm glad to be here.
So great to have you. And next to her is Andrew Zolli, founder of Planet Labs. Andrew, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? It's great to see all of you here and to come back to this amazing event after participating in it last year. My name is Andrew Zolli. I'm the Chief Impact Officer of an organization called Planet. We are probably best known for having built and deployed the largest constellation of Earth-observing satellites in history, which collectively image the entire terrestrial surface of the Earth every day in high resolution. And I do want to say that I don't know if you ever have this experience where you're sitting next to people who are more accomplished than they introduce themselves to be. So I'm just going to take a second to reintroduce Jemilah, who is by far the most incredible person I've ever met. Jemilah, how many babies have you delivered?
15,000.
15,000 babies, okay? So whatever else, right. So when I introduce the work that we do, which is about, it's about space and AI and the biggest data, everyone gets very impressed. But I'm sitting next to a person who's delivered 15,000 babies, so nothing I've ever done has been actually all that interesting. So anyway, I'm excited to have this conversation with you about planetary health today.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad you double-clicked on Dr. Jamilah's incredible background. And finally, rounding us out, last but not least, is Sheikh Majid Sultan Al-Qassimi, founder of Soma Management Consultancy.
Thank you so much. My name is Majid. I spent about 10 years here in government in the UAE, both in Abu Dhabi and in the federal government. Left in 2021 and had started a consultancy advisory on food and water security and sustainability and net zero transition. So those two themes being really the pressing matters that are long view. And it's been an interesting ride because when I have the opportunity to share thoughts with such global leaders, it's a pleasure to be here and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. We're going to start with Dr. Jemilah. As we're talking about planetary health today, maybe what you can do is start by helping us understand what is planetary health.
Thank you, Sonali. Before I do that, let me tell you a short story. So as Andrew mentioned, I am an obstetrician and gynecologist, and in year 2000, in my humanitarian experience, I watched on television as a woman in Mozambique had to climb up onto a mango tree to give birth to her daughter as the floodwaters were raging and the Limpopo River had overflown and there were crocodiles below her. As an obstetrician, I think she's probably the best obstetrician in the world because I cannot imagine delivering a baby on a tree because babies do come out very slippery. Then fast forward, in the year 2019, I had the opportunity to go to Mozambique after a terrible flood. At the time, I was working with the International Red Cross, and I was talking to midwives and playing with kids, and I recalled this story of, her name is Rosita, the baby that was born. And to my surprise, the midwife looked at me and smiled, and she said, well, that boy you just played with, his mother just gave birth on a tree. And I said to myself, how is it almost 20 years later, Women still don't have access to healthcare facilities. Facilities are so vulnerable to disasters. And around 2015, that was the time I was like reevaluating my life, right? Was I putting Band-Aid on gaping wounds? In 2015, a group of doctors, scientists came together and said, it's not enough to look at health from the perspectives that we have been looking at. 80% of the determinants of health are outside the health sector. Planetary health emerged after a Lancet Commission founded by the Rockefeller Foundation as a science, but also a movement to remind us and to push us to think differently that the health of human civilization is inextricably linked to the health of the planet. And without which, if the planet doesn't thrive, there's no way human civilization can thrive. So planetary health, in essence, is about taking the science of the planet, taking the science of human health and well-being, and ensuring that the impact of our actions, the Anthropocene, on the planet will not damage our human health further. So planetary health is both the health of the planet and the health of humans. It's not planetary or human health.
Can you give us a little bit more on that? How exactly does planetary health differ from traditional health paradigms?
Yeah. So in traditional health paradigms, you have the concept of maybe One Health that looks at the health of humans in relation to animals and in relation to the environment to some aspect. Planetary health is about systemic shifts that are required. It's no longer about linear thinking. It's about, really looking at the impact of human civilization on the planet and on health, and therefore requiring us to think differently, to consume differently, to behave differently, and to be able to reassess our relationship with the planet and others as well, because we are so interdependent. So at its best, I would say, in simple words, planetary health is a silo-busting systemic approach to ensuring that the planet and human civilization will both thrive.
Thank you. That's actually the perfect segue to Andrew. I think you have some slides to show us, but what we really want to ask you to give us more details on is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with planetary boundaries. There are, in fact, 9. Can you talk us through a little bit of that and how it...
So I really love Jemilah's remark about silo busting. Deeply resilient systems are systems that operate at multiple time scales, multiple geographic scales. We have to connect not just the intimate story that Jemilah just told us about the woman that you were describing, to the kind of forces of change that operate at much larger scales that are become the determinants of public health. So I have the great daily pleasure of working with a lot of literal rocket scientists, people who they say things like, they don't say things like it's not rocket science, they say it's only rocket science. So how many rocket scientists are here? Okay, 1. How many astronauts are here, just out of curiosity? Okay, all right, so I would like to give you a lesson that you can take into the cocktail sipping tea moment that we will all have later when we're all talking to each other about what it takes to build satellites. So up above me, you can see this is one of our instruments. And whenever you're building a satellite that orbits the Earth, in addition to whatever its primary purpose is, you have to put inside and on the surface of that instrument all kinds of other sensors that tell you about what's happening to the satellite. You have to measure the forces of change at least as fast as those forces of change are acting on that satellite. Otherwise, it could begin to tumble out of orbit. If you only looked once an hour, the whole satellite could have crashed in that period of time. So this idea that when we're building something that we want to maintain in a state of healthy, dynamic disequilibrium, it's always changing, but it's changing around a healthy mean. We have to measure change as fast as it's occurring. Well, I have news for everybody here. You live on a satellite. This one down here, it's a little harder to see. It just happens to be going around the sun, and it has 8 billion other astronauts on it and counting. So when I asked you how many astronauts were here, everybody's hand should have gone up, right? We're all on a satellite that is in a period where there are significant forces of change acting upon it that we're not measuring with the speed and intensity that those forces of change are unfolding. And as a consequence, primarily because of our own actions, we're tipping systems out of a healthy range of balance. And you can see that in this diagram that I should probably almost get out of the way of. How many people have seen the version of this diagram before? I think there's like a couple people. For most of you who have not seen it, these are what are called the 9 planetary boundaries. These are the 9 systems. I'm just going to stand over here so you can actually take a picture of it.
This is the active panel.
Yeah, so, oops, sorry. So these are the 9 systems a group of planetary scientists have identified that make it possible for civilization to flourish, for all of us to live on this Earth. And if those systems are maintained within a set of safe operating conditions, the planet will naturally regenerate and process change in a sort of healthy way. It doesn't mean there won't be disruptions. It means that the elasticity of the Earth system allows us to accommodate these disruptions. But you can see when this system, when this 9 planetary boundaries framework was first established, the first time they did it, 2 of the 9 systems were being pushed past the planet's natural regenerative capacity. Today, 6 of the 9 are outside of their healthy parameters. And that has profound consequences. And these are things like changes to the integrity of the biosphere, the ozone layer, ocean acidification, freshwater availability. So when we think about the SDGs and when we think primarily in this case about planetary health, these are the systems. This is not a map of planetary health. These are the boundary systems, the boundaries of the systems that enable planetary health and that framework that Jemilah was describing to unfold. So I'll just share with you one thing we're doing. This is our little contribution to this. We've deployed the largest constellation of satellites in history that collectively image the Earth. So as the Earth is spinning around on its axis every day, these are hundreds of satellites that spin from, I have to come out of the speaker zone, that spin from pole to pole, and they image the entire surface of the Earth so that primarily we can measure change as fast as it's occurring. And we'll probably stop there. I have a little extra thing to show you later, but we'll see if we get to it.
Thank you, Andrew. That really helps set the stage. But we are here, as we talked about when we prepped for this panel, to talk about a long time into the future. And so, Majid, what we really want to know from your side is, if we were to imagine a UAE that was basically the epitome of planetary health in 50 years, how do we work backward? What does it look like, and how do we work backwards to get there, starting today?
So I'm a veterinarian by training, and most people are like, oh, you must love animals, but I'm actually a lover of biology and this spaceship. If anybody's read Buckminster Fuller's book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, that's what I do, right? I was a clinician like yourself, Dr. Jemilah, just not bringing human babies to the world. But in studying not only that biology, but everything else, understanding how the world operates and being able to set policy, help the ecosystem, catalyze a future that we can all look forward to, it is about a place in the future that understands what all of this information means in terms of policy, in terms of an ecosystem or an economy, right? We're all moving through the world. That future that we talk about, where we have our well-being and the environment, or the whole of our satellite here moving through space, it's going to be a place where we are intimately, or rather we have a full understanding of what the impacts are. Right, today we're running through the environment, we're doing our thing, it's busy, got to get your coffee. In that future, everything we do will have circularity involved. We will understand our impact on the ecosystem and the city you're living in, or the rural area you live in. Your commute will be measured and understood. Today, all of the net zero goals that we're talking about so that we have less of an impact on the environment, well, the UAE and Dubai specifically are looking to make urban living a model for what that might look like in the rest of the world. I talk often about how the UAE is a lab for us to be able to do things. And here at the Museum of the Future and the Future Foundation and all of these thought leaders here that I get to hang out with are all trying to figure out what that might look like so we can work backwards. And for different professions, it means different things, right? Where every mother can give birth not only in the comfort of an environment that isn't going to challenge, you know, that child's upbringing in the future, but also to know that we can continue to have children, we can continue to have an ecosystem. Those planetary boundaries, right? We're all nudging those things along with everything we do. Now, we are systems thinkers as well in our advisory, and we work with different companies. For instance, I have a client, BIA Group. Their job is waste management. How many of you are thinking about waste management on a day-to-day? Right? No, somebody is. But there is, and there's somebody else in the back. But the idea is our lives get busy. We get the blinders on, and we get very focused on the thing right in front of us. We need to have a future where we don't need to worry about what our activity is because of ramifications on the earth. And how we navigate that in the future, we will learn in practice through experimentation here, right? It is about trying. And we were just having a conversation earlier about how certain cities and certain countries stagnate, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, actually, it is breaking slowly. Who's suffering is the planet. So when you talk about what that future looks like, honestly, it's going to be an ecosystem, people, an economy that's cognizant of its impact, but also has the tools to be able to alleviate the pressure on the earth because it talks to the sustainability of our well-being and our economy, right? I don't know what it looks like physically. If you're into sci-fi, you may have seen something. Might not be exactly that. But I know it's human-centric and why we're here today and why you're all here today, right?
Building on that, I want to go back to Dr. Jemilah because my understanding is Malaysia has just given the go-ahead for the first for the planetary health action plan, and that's the first country in the world to do so. Yes. And I understand you were instrumental in helping that get over the line. And I really want to understand more about what does that look like? What is a country's planetary health plan? And also, are we looking at a future where all countries need to have one? And if so, how long is that going to take?
Okay. I'm not an obstetrician for nothing, you know. The three words I use most are push, push, and push. So, you know, that's how you get your government going, right? I think that I'm very proud that Malaysia has just endorsed, the Prime Minister and Cabinet just endorsed the first ever National Planetary Health Action Plan. And it is about designing a plan that incorporates looking at the planetary boundaries, ensuring that we don't transgress them, but also develop as a nation. You know, we are aiming to be a high-income country, and we are a small country in comparison. But what it has resulted in is really looking at it through systems lenses, but also through a science, technology, innovation, and economic framework. What I mean by that is the science will tell us what we need to do around environment, health. The economic frameworks will need to tell us how we look at financial sustainability, what kind of development model do we want? Is it GDP focused or is it beyond GDP? We're looking at well-being economics, regenerative economics, donut economics, and then also education. What kind of education revolution is needed? If only 15% of medical schools around the world teach about climate and health. So when you have a heat wave, the chances are doctors don't realize you're actually going to get a heart attack because you're vulnerable, and they don't take a decent enough history or understand the links between heat and non-communicable diseases or cardiovascular events. When you have microplastics that we are all consuming, then there is an impact on everyone, including an unborn child. Now, the other aspect, of course, is looking at governance. What kind of governance models? Here comes the silo busting. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, you have 17 goals, and chances are, as in my country, the Ministry of Health will take health. But health is dependent on gender equality. It's dependent on water. It's dependent on food systems. It's dependent on whether climate change happens or not, right? So the whole premise of social equity is the fundamental of planetary health. So what we will do also with this plan is also looking at the importance of behavioral change in communications, because I mentioned at the outset, planetary health is really looking at the impact of our behaviors on the planet, the way we consume, right? The way we discard things. So with this plan now, it will go into our 13th Malaysia plan. Every 5 years, we develop a national economic plan, a blueprint with budgeting and so forth, because if you don't have budget, you can't move a plan forward. So it will require, the planetary health framework will support the attainment of sustainable development goals and accelerate it, because it helps you break those silos and then look at things from a systems perspective and get different parts of government, plus civil society, plus private sector to work together. Yeah. One fundamental aspect in terms of economic development is that we have to shift from a thinking of return of investment to a return on values, which means that the businesses that drive that need to look at the impact on society, on their stakeholders and everybody else, right? And for us to do that, it's easy to speak about this, but how do you make it happen? To make it happen, you need to have the levers, and the levers are what we call the 8I and 8R, which means that you need to create the ecosystem to facilitate the return of values. So in the 8I, it means you have to re-examine your infrastructure, your infrastructure, your internalization, all the I's, right? And the 8R's is how you reprogram the way you think, the way you work, which is nature-centric, reuse, recycle, repurpose, and so on and so forth. So this is what we're doing. I hope we succeed. And it also means our entire education blueprint has to change. I come from Sunway University. It's a young university. It's a private, non-profit university. It's the top private university in ASEAN region. And what we have done is make planetary health, a 7-week module, mandatory for all our undergraduates. They cannot pass their graduation without completing this course. What the educational blueprint will do is that 2026 to 2035, our next 10-year educational blueprint, planetary health and sustainability, will be mandatory for all students in higher learning.
Are there other countries that are close to kind of approving planetary health plans, such as Malaysia?
I don't think they have the plans, but I know Costa Rica is probably ahead of most countries. But the opportunity lies in the fact that Malaysia becomes chair of ASEAN next year. So we are pushing our Prime Minister, our Education Minister, our Health Minister to bring this framework to ASEAN. If even 50% of ASEAN embraces this in some form or other, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, then I think we will have traction. And I hope, coming here to Dubai, I specifically came because I'm excited to share this, because I think Dubai is a doer, right? And the UAE are people who just get up and do it. We are willing to share with you, and, it's time for the Global South to lead, guys.
Amen.
Majid, I'd really like you to comment on that in a second, but I just want one more follow-up. Dr. Jemilah, you mentioned the SDGs.
Yeah.
We've been talking about SDGs for close to 20 years.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that the planetary health framework doesn't end up, I'm sorry to say, but where the SDGs have ended up, where there's a lack of metrics and kind of, actual measuring and actual results that we can point to, and it becomes narrative and marketing to some extent and vision, but maybe less concrete results?
Thank you for asking me that, because I have an answer. The reason why we're excited and we're confident is because, I see my colleague here who was with us in Malaysia. We were in Malaysia in April. We had a planetary health summit.
Yeah, that's cool.
And at the summit, we decided that we can't just come together at a conference and leave after listening to people talking. A 1.5-year process before the summit created the first planetary health roadmap and action plan for the global community. I'm very happy to share that with you. You can also just Google planetary health roadmap and action plan, you'll get it online. And what it does is it shows you the way. How do you embrace planetary health? How do you make it work? And the first thing you need to do in the action plan is how do you measure planetary health? And what we're doing is we're working with Pacific Disaster Center and others to look at what are the data that you require to be able to have some kind of index. For example, ultimately, it is about what policies are in place, what finances are in place, what about education, what about business, what about data, how do you leverage technology. So all these things that you can actually measure. And what we will do in Malaysia with the planetary health framework that we will use to support the SDGs is there will be a monitoring framework for that as well, which means that government will be held accountable to deliver on the framework because there will be indicators very clearly spelled out. Now, I think that the way forward is really about this, right? About, SDGs, only 19% have been met. But we cannot give up on the SDGs. I think they could have been designed better, but what we have is what we have. And what I think we can do is use the planetary framework to support and complement the SDGs, not replace it, because what you want is actually to have safe people, planet, and prosperity. But how do you use the planetary health framework to support, institutions, the public at large, businesses, and so forth, to drive, attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals?
Majid,
Yeah.
you want to follow up on that?
Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
Role of
Thank you very much. About the doing. So in the time I have been in government, and even now I spend a lot of time between public and private sector, where we are today is very much about the data. The raison d'être for me to set up Soma Mater was because we couldn't find the data and there was no entity that took it on itself to start collating this. So Soma Mater is trying to assimilate as much data on the GCC, the Middle East, and the wider North Africa as states that have a lot of opportunity to demonstrate and to deliver change. And there is action. It's not that it isn't there. But policymakers, businesses, all have a sort of shot in the dark when it comes to, okay, where is the biggest impact? How can we measure that impact? You're kind of swinging out and hoping you hit something with your programs. Now, in the UAE, the difference that maybe sets us apart from everybody else is that we have executive leadership that everybody turns on a dime for. So you'll have leadership takes it on themselves to say, okay, we need a net zero strategy. This is what happens. We were the first in the Middle East to sign the Paris Agreement because the leadership understood that. And the way that rolls down with our vision documents and strategies, as well as our net zero strategy, is the rollout comes from the federal to the local to the private sector. And we have local champions that take it on as well. I think where we're going to find the friction and the kind of work that Dr. Jemilah is talking about is in the doing of the SMEs, is everybody else, right? I think the challenge with data is also the awareness, is understanding where to start. I do a lot of speaking around net zero transition, and I've been at all sorts of events. And I always ask, who in your company or has your company got a net zero transition strategy? Have you? I mean, literally, the question goes out here. Wherever you're working today, do you know you have a net zero strategy?
Yes.
No, only the AI bots put its hand up. So the idea is that this, okay. Yes, super. When a city has, right? But it's the businesses that move, right? Government can put out its strategies. The cities, major infrastructure can put their strategies. But the businesses are ultimately the ones that turn things around. And getting these businesses to get on the boat, as it were, to start implementing this, it's intimidating. It's difficult, even today, to still find credible information for their context. By the way, SDGs are great, but it's like very vanilla, right? Mm-hmm. There are ways that we could have done them better for different contexts, right? The UAE is very different from, Singapore and Malaysia, as well as in North America and Europe. We all have different contexts. We all have different environments. How do we get on that, right? And there's the data guy waiting for his turn, right? So I pass it on, but that is the information that we need.
And-
Go ahead, Andrew.
Andrew, tell us how technology and data can empower the success of putting into place these planetary health plans.
That's a great question. I just want to tie these. I feel like I'm sitting between two brilliant people who are giving you the regional perspective. And the thing that's so important is that what planetary health means is going to mean something different
To each region.
And I think the thing that's really important about this particular paradigm, I kind of wish that we had decided to do planetary health and not the SDGs. Because everyone we're all creatures who understand our own health and the health of our societies. We all understand that it's impossible to be healthy on an unhealthy planet. No one needs to tell us that. We know that on an intuitive level. The thing that I think is particularly interesting, and this is the largest collection of futurists in the world, right? And because of that, I think that for those of you who are thinking about this, the thing that I'm really interested in is the differences in framing. So for instance, in the West, there was a commission, the Lancet Commission, and funded by a Western philanthropy, established this sort of planetary health framework. And in China, at roughly the same time, we saw the emergence of a different idea, which was about what does it mean to live in an ecological civilization that was more connected to the deep roots of Chinese Confucianism and not connected as much to the sort of Western institutional architectures. And there was an incredible moment of dialogue between those systems. And I think there's immense opportunities for us to create culturally appropriate, deeply resonant frames of shared health for the planet and for ourselves that I think is something that I think we'll find many more participation pathways in that story. But I think the big story, in order to get going, is the very first step is sort of mapping out what health means in a system. So could you guys throw my slides up one more time? Just put wherever the last slide was up. I'm just going to see if I can do this in reverse, because I just think this was, let's see if we can do this. Okay, so I'm skipping ahead. Yeah, so here's an example, okay, of the kinds of systems mapping that I think we have to do. So I'm just going to give you like the simplest version imaginable. Okay, so here we are overlooking these agricultural fields. So what do we know that's happening on the Earth right now is massive explosion of the number of human beings. It took us 40,000 years to get to the first billion modern humans. We're going to add the last billion humans in about a decade. And it's happening right now. And we know that that, in particular, is driving a massive explosion for the need for agriculture. We have to feed 9 billion people, and we have to have systems that are ready to feed those 9 billion people. And that, in turn, is driving huge amounts of deforestation around the world. We use about a third of the world's landmass for agriculture and for livestock. And the principal driver of deforestation on the Earth is the conversion of lands for that purpose. It's not for cities. It's for feeding the people who live in the cities. And that, in turn, that deforestation is driving huge amounts of pandemic risk, because as we squeeze wildlife into ever more dense arrangements, we are increasing the interactions between human and livestock and wildlife. And that is bad in both directions, by the way. It's bad for everybody because we're killing a lot of birds. We're killing a lot of insects. We're living through the 6th mass extinction. But it's also then driving huge amounts of increased climate risk because the trees were holding all that carbon. So the question in this system is, this is a generic one, and it will look different here than it looks down the road, right, collectively across the board. So the question is, where do we intervene once we've actually mapped out the system? And that is a job for the people in this room, because I think there's some of the world's best systems mappers actually collected at this event. And the thing in particular, the thing we're doing, I'll just share with you, is we're intervening here. So what we're doing is we're using the satellite data to look at, I'm going to see if I can show you this. So when we look down from space, you can actually see that this part of the field in red is really water stressed, but the other part isn't. So if we can efficiently use resources to apply them only where and when they are actually going to deliver the same or better yields, we can begin to de-intensify the stressors in those complex systems. And this is how we get closer to understanding.
Nope, you've just lost your mic as well.
Okay, and you lost my mic. But you get the idea, right? It's that this is the foundational layer on which the kinds of inclusive, culturally understood practices and behaviors get built. And there is a role for technology and data in all of this. Data plays a role in all these things, but ultimately only when it's in the hands of people whose behavior it can influence. So I'll stop there.
Can I jump on that? So when we're talking about food, and by the way, it's a big driver of a lot of things in climate,
Yeah.
but there's two aspects here. What we're not seeing, well, it's more on the population side, going back. So how does agriculture get food back to the population? Both this issue, in that we don't have enough food, there is actually an understanding that there is enough food on the planet for all human beings. We're just not moving it in, it's a distribution issue.
Right.
So have we got all the farms in the wrong place? Have we overproduced for a certain population? All technology is going to give us, and I say it not like that, let me rephrase that. What technology is going to allow us to do is to dial in the resources, the effort, the carbon costs for all of these things, and start to walk some of these things back. One thing I'm very happy, and it was published in The Economist, I believe, end of last year, but degrowth is not needed. We don't need to shut things down and turn things back. But we do need to get very sensitive about where we are overusing, abusing, drawing too much, right? And in this country, water is a key element. It may be taken for granted that all your hotel rooms have running water, and we've invested in a lot of infrastructure, but that water needs to be circularized. We need it back in the system. And when you go down to some very traditional practices, this was understood intuitively and implicitly. You didn't have to tell people to reuse resources efficiently. And I think what's happened is with growth, we've sort of exploded into the future. Now, I don't know, who was here in April? I love bringing this up because we wrote a white paper, yeah? Okay, there was more water that fell in one day than we've had in a whole year, right? There were Teslas floating in the streets because people didn't understand the consequence of what all that water in one day, this is a whole year's worth of rain, and it was monsoon style. So we, fortunately, unfortunately, had been writing a white paper on water capture and reuse in the urban setting because we understood that water as a gift, you know, when it does rain, should be utilized, right? And that's what when we talk about our quality of life, this is where we need it. We don't need to worry about water, desal, although we have it and it's very useful. There's a lot of water coming from the sky. I didn't want to say free, it's there. But capturing those resources and making conscious decisions to make it useful, right? Flooding is a bad thing, and if infrastructure is built a certain way and our hospitals are sitting in floodways, well, then we're going to have a problem. But what technology allows us to do, especially with things like what Planet's doing, is where are the floodways? Where is water moving? Where in the last rains did it stagnate? You know, there are countries that suffer malaria, suffer other zoonotic diseases because of where water stands. And you'd think, well, this is great, we've got water. It can also be a burden and a problem. So knowledge, data, and then ultimately the ability to act on it. And when you have a planet-thinking country, right? Somebody who's thinking at grand scale, it really comes down to how you execute on the ground.
But ultimately, what I think we need to do is ground it back on human behaviors and our health, right? Because everything that was mentioned, for example, you know, this whole issue around pandemic risk, flooding, and extreme rainfall, the climate change that we're experiencing. One of my colleagues, you know, really described it well to me. And he said, climate change is not a problem. Climate change is a crisis. The problem is we have the technology and the know-how, but we don't use it. And he's right. We have, even in this museum right now, enough intellectual capacity to solve all the problems in the world. But what we need ultimately is good leadership, good governance, and that is the most difficult things to transform. And I think having a plan can help you accelerate that because it pushes responsibility, right?
And
I d-
accountability.
Absolutely, but I wanted to come back on the issue of climate change and the risk to health. It's severe. I mean, as we speak, yesterday, you know, in the Gulf that you've been having extreme rainfall. In a desert country, you know, basically that didn't think it needed large drains because it doesn't receive much rain. So adaptation now is going to be key. I think what we need to do is we've got to reset our brain to 3 degrees. And what's going to happen at 3 degrees so that we start looking at how we adapt. And in that process, I promise you mitigation will feature. Because you have no choice. The other thing I wanted to point out is yesterday, Delhi had the highest PMI 2.5, right? I was called by journalists left, right, and center. Do you know that babies are born with smoker's lung in women who have never smoked a day in their life? So the absorption.
And actually, my reporter is in Delhi right now.
Oh,
and
okay.
He cannot breathe inside his home.
Absolutely.
So just to be clear, and he has air purifiers. Cannot breathe.
I just share a tiny little anecdote. Using our satellites, we were able to observe PM 2.5 basically in atmospheric concentrations directly as they're happening. And we worked with a team at a university in the United States called Stanford to assess this really interesting fact. When China decided to shutter its factories and basically say everyone has to sequester at home, in that period, in the official statistics, which may or may not fully capture reality, something like 5,000 people died from COVID. In the same period, this team of Stanford economists looking at the data found that probably 70,000 people had their lives extended from the absence of PM 2.5 from the factories where they lived.
Well, we know this because I live in Hong Kong, and twice a year the factories shut down for 2 weeks at a time.
Right.
And it's like living in a completely different city. The air pollution is gone.
Could I bring up who here was in the last panel? Who watched the last panel? What? Yeah, there was Ali Al Mullah was here. She does longevity, right? We've been writing a paper with partners on sustainability and longevity. And it's equivocal. Like, I mean, there it was just about how these two realms can come together. But all we are talking about is if we want to live long, healthy lives that we can contribute to the economy, to society, we're going to have to take it seriously that what planetary health is, you know, we live in it. We're not devoid of the environment. If you cannot breathe inside your home, and Delhi maybe had this the 2.5, but they also in India had some of the highest heat waves this year as well, and this year's going on record as the hottest year. And like, guys,
We're here.
we're here. I don't know what people are waiting for.
COP29
Right?
has already said it. 1.5 is over.
No, like it's
No,
about
let's-
action.
Let's
It's
move
about
on
now.
to 3. Preparing for 3.
But the sad thing and reality is this will be the coolest year for the next 30 years, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it's just going to get hotter and hotter. But, you know, I don't want us to think about doom and gloom all the time because I do think there are solutions. There are places where things have worked, right? And what we need to do is accelerate and move faster on this. You know, on that note as well, you know, the pattern of disease has changed. You can get dengue now in Texas, right? You know, Lyme
100%.
disease is going south. And you know, all these things that are happening because the planet is warming up. But again, you know, Andrew and I had lunch and we were discussing how we can deploy satellite imagery to look at predictive patterns of, say, dengue outbreaks in my country or other countries, because I think the science is there, and that will then need to translate into good public health communications to early warning systems and so forth.
Yeah. I just
Last
had
one. We are at the end,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately, but please go
Here's-
ahead. Last one, Andrew.
The very last thing I wanted to say to you is that sometimes when you look at the Earth and we're thinking about planetary health, it can feel like the film strip of doom, right? You're just watching things move in the wrong direction. But the reality is we can actually see things moving in the right direction. There's a Dutch NGO called Just Dig It, Diggit. And what they do is they work with communities in denuded landscapes that have been, where all the trees have been cut down. And in those landscapes, the land becomes hydrophobic.
Yeah.
So when you get massive rains, it pools at the surface and you get floating Teslas. So what they do is they encourage the digging of these what are called bunds. They're very large structures that puncture the earth, and they allow for more of the scarce rains to collect and then to regreen just by creating essentially a permeable surface. And we have been able to directly observe in peer-reviewed research that over 3.5 years where these bunds were built in Tanzania, the temperature of the ground dropped by 0.5 degree, the amount of water in the surface soil increased by 30%, and the level of green cover increased by 50%. And the reason that's so powerful is that if you can measure it, you can incentivize it, you can pay for it. You can say, in this one area of Malaysia, this aspect of this behavior is something we want to do because we want to encourage an inclusive sense of planetary health. And because we can observe it, we can ensure that it's happening and we can pay for it when it does. So there are all kinds of new structures, I think, that are coming that aren't just about doing the behaviors themselves, but actually encouraging them to occur through the big systems like the movement of capital.
Thank you. I'm sorry that that's all we're going to have time for. We've been called time already. And sorry that we haven't had any questions from the audience, but thank you so much, everyone. And you can contact us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you. You were great.